We're very excited about working with Jumex and working with you, especially because I think you're one of the few persons in our field who has this global vision of what Latin America is, but also Latin America in dialogue. No? For me, it would be interesting to hear from you, about your understanding of what Latin America is today. If we can still continue to talk about Latin America, how do you understand Latin America in relationship to art practices and curatorial practices?
For me, Latin America has been always a thorny concept because it tends to homogenize and becomes an umbrella term for a region that is very diverse, has its own specificities country from country. And I like very much the way Jorge Glusberg, in his text for the CAIC, Centro de Arte y Comunicación in Argentina in the 1960s and 70s, conceptualized this idea of Latin America. For him, there was not a Latin American art, but a Latin American problem.
Wow.
And I think this is a very interesting way to approach Latin America through its problems. And I think that, in a way, this is what you do in your show, because you address certain specificities or certain problems that are common to these countries, but that in their individual approach, artists have a very different take to these different Latin American problems. So we have the problem of the modern, or of this incomplete modernization process that many countries in the region went through in the 1940s until the 1960s, more or less, but that contributed to the drastic change of the urban landscape in major cities such as Mexico City, Caracas, Rio de Janeiro, or São Paulo. And then also in the validation of a modernist canon, also the idea of the promotion through different instances of the language of geometric abstraction. So I think that's something you address. That can be considered as a Latin American problem. But then you also address the idea of the tropics, how we relate to this idea of the natural world and how it has been inscribed into our imaginaries, especially because the indigenous populations have this very close relationship with nature, which was entirely different from the European relationship with nature, which was one of conquest and domination.
Exploitation.
And we can think of artists who've been working on that with this idea of nature in their work and how nature becomes another form of knowledge, one that comes also from the South. In your show, you also address the idea of politics, how political upheavals and social upheavals have shaped art production in Latin America. So be it through the idea of the dictatorial regimes that have appeared in many countries since the 1960s until the moment, because now in Venezuela we're living what many countries in Latin America lived in the 1960s and 70s. And this idea of ideology as well. So I think in your show you do cover a lot of these Latin American problems. So maybe you can elaborate a little more on that.
For me, an interesting thing, or something that was very important to me to do in the exhibition, was that it was not only going to be about the problem of the contemporary, but also to relate it to those artistic practitioners from the 60s and 70s which had approached similar problematics through art, and that had used art to deal with politics in a way, also using a conceptual language, in order to do two things. In one to show that contemporary art in Latin America hadn't appeared out of nothing, but that there was a history, and two, that some of these histories were not present in the mapping of the main history of art, or the main narratives of art, so bringing them forward. You've worked a lot also with artists from that generation, and I think that's their contribution to artistic discourses worldwide, beyond Latin America, is this union or this tension between politics and aesthetics that is very present in their work.
I think your show is a first in terms of this new museum, which is very young. It's only a year and a half old, and I think it will contribute to open these avenues of thought and inquiry into the problems of Latin America and how they have been addressed historically in contemporary history by artists from the different countries.
Thank you very much, Julieta. I look forward to seeing you in November when we will be installing the exhibition here, working with your team, developing a very strong education program and addressing the problem of Latin America.
Okay, thank you.